You're back with us on America's Forum. We're glad that you are. I'm J.D. Hayworth.
Yeah, always glad to make it back to work on Monday after the weekend. Thanks for sticking around for us and being here with us here on the show. Quick update now out of Malaysia and the missing jet airliner. New info coming from the Prime Minister today. This is more objects were spotted floating in the Indian Ocean. The Prime Minister telling families of passengers aboard missing flight 370 that the plane went down in a remote southern Indian Ocean. He said that this assessment is based on new data in a rare news conference today. He also says that he feels, quote, deep sadness about the current situation. The Prime Minister's comments come after relatives of passengers aboard the flight voiced anger and frustration about not getting responses to technical questions about the search for the missing jet. It has been 17 days since Flight 370 first disappeared. Angry relatives have accused the Malaysian government of deliberately concealing the truth about the fate of the jetliner. And in Snohomish County, Washington, the death toll now stands at 8. Rescue and recovery teams found 4 more bodies Sunday afternoon after this weekend's massive mudslide. The search for survivors continues today. The mudslide destroyed dozens of homes. Authorities say recent heavy rains triggered the catastrophic mudslide.
Conditions are very, very muddy. In places, it is still like quicksand. So we weren't able to search the entire debris field. They were able to search some areas that were safer and a little bit more dry than other areas. Other areas are they're just not accessible at this time.
More names have been added to the list of missing persons today. And a massive cleanup operation is now underway off the coast of Texas. This oil spill is a result of a collision between a cargo ship and a fuel oil barge. The Coast Guard says about 168,000 gallons of fuel oil have leaked out there near Galveston, Texas.
Doesn't matter. For operational purposes, we're responding as though the entire amount of the cargo in that tank, which is again the just over 4,000 barrels, is in the water.
Local fishermen have complained about oil in their nets and on their lines. Also, the Houston Ship Channel is closed right now because of this, affecting cruise ship and other traffic. Now, time for a quick recap, JD, of some of the comments we saw on the Sunday shows. You know, a lot of those big stories like Crimea, Ukraine, and elsewhere make the top headlines, but there's always some good nuggets buried in those interviews on the Sunday television shows.
Always have them, and invariably it ends up being politics. For example, a guy I used to work with, the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrinch. Let's take a listen to the former Speaker on CNN's State of the Union, talking about the Rand Paul revolution.
Rand Paul is actually raising profound questions that go right at the heart of the American establishment. He's saying you built this huge national security apparatus. You've now apparently had the CIA spying on the Senate Intelligence Committee. This is crazy.
So interesting comments there from Newt, who really, you know, has his finger on the pulse of what can kind of take a campaign from, you know, something that's behind the scenes there to really in the forefront. Obviously, Rand Paul's leading the list of potential nominees right now, but he's clearly tapped into something that people care about. And
I would not rule out Newt Gingrich from taking another look at running for president. The thing about Newt, and having served as a backbencher, a newcomer to Congress, when Newt became the first Republican speaker in 40 years, he has a genuine ability, given his knowledge of history and where politics and policy intersect, to come in to a variety of forums and make a compelling case. And you're right, John, he does have his fingers on the pulse, but also just his breadth of knowledge and his persuasive power. There were sometimes we'd go into a House Republican conference, or I would go in saying, no, I don't think we ought to be doing this. But the speaker could explain in very cogent terms why it was important. We still had our disagreements, but quite a few times he was able to sway the conference, given that ability to analyze what was going on.
Well, Newt is known as an ideas guy, and that's what the party needs right now, right? Ideas. So, you know, you can never rule out Newt, especially when he has a talk show on CNN every day. We get to see his face. Next one up, this is an interesting one coming on NBC's Meet the Press. Congressman Mike Rogers, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, talking about Edward Snowden's involvement with the Russians.
I do believe there's more to this story. He is under the influence of Russian intelligence officials today. He's actually supporting, in an odd way, this very activity of brazen brutality and expansionism of Russia.
Right, so we haven't talked about Edward Snowden all that much right now. You know, obviously it's a subplot to this whole situation with the United States and Russia. And JD, it's hard to believe that Edward Snowden would be in Russia right now and not talking to their security apparatus in some way, shape, or form.
Well, and again, Mike Rogers, in the role that he plays, knowing Mike as I do, having served with him in Congress, former Army officer, former FBI agent, now chairing the Intelligence Committee, with all due respect to Mike Rogers, it's more than Russia. Let's not forget that we saw Mr. Snowden flee to Hong Kong. Hong Kong under the control of communist China now. So you've got the two major geopolitical adversaries of the United States with access to Mr. Snowden. Now, you connect the dots there, and all this notion of canonizing Mr. Snowden, you have to stop and wait and say, now, wait a minute. Why would it be Hong Kong and then Moscow? And what is really afoot here? And that's what I think Mike Rogers was talking about yesterday in his appearance.
Clearly, Mike Rogers has the credibility to make those kind of statements. We've also heard those statements right here on the same show from a guy like General Michael Hayden. These guys know what they're talking about, especially when it comes to security. And you talked about the canonization of Edward Snowden, JD, and you're so right. Obviously, there is a way that you can bring this to everyone's attention, stay here in the United States, and face the music here without running off to Russia. And that's what Snowden hasn't done. He made this stuff public, and he took off and hit the hills. And now we don't know when we'll get him back, and we don't know what's been lost in all this.
It would be a far more compelling case had Snowden, as you said, say, look, we've got serious problems, and I'm going to err on the side of a free press in a free nation, even with the risk that I have personally, perhaps of liability of spilling the secrets, to expose and stay here and be part of the process. When you run first to Hong Kong and then you end up in Russia, well, as we said earlier, you connect the dots geopolitically, and you have to think there may be something else afoot, something that could cause harm rather than help the United States, even with the problems we may have with our intelligence apparatus.
Yeah, frightening stuff, JD, when you think about how much information could have been lost in the Snowden breach, certainly, not someone you want to hold up as a hero.
No. Well, we have more politics to talk about, not surprisingly. When we come back, we will be talking about 2016. I know we have the 2014 midterms, but an interesting meeting between presidential hopefuls. As always, we love to hear from you. Tweet us your questions at Newsmax TV.